Ramblin' Reference.
In this episode, we took Walk 16, Mount Tabor Neighborhoods and Park Loop.
I'm ready.
Hey, Lori.
Hi, Becky.
So, we walked around Mount Tabor and then some.
Yes. I think we ended up with 7 miles under our belts.
Yeah. I think my feet didn't stop throbbing until like middle of the next day. Yeah. It was a lot of walking.
But it was good. Just a few uphills.
Yes. So we started at 60th and Stark.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we walked around the north side, kind of through some of those neighborhoods.
Which I was not as familiar with, so that was kind of nice for me to see those neighborhoods.
It was surprising to see some vacant lots still.
Yes.
And then we went around just down one street on the west side of Mount Tabor. And because we're using an old version of the book, the empty lots that were mentioned in that book were not empty lots any longer.
Yes, so our views were obscured.
Yes. So we still had to kind of peer through the side yards of the houses.
Still some nice views, though.
Yeah,
you can see.
I think they were still pretty nice, and those houses probably have really great views now.
Yes, good for them.
The houses behind them don't. And then we went through the park and around the reservoirs, and
the empty reservoir.
Yes, the very empty reservoirs with lots of construction equipment in them, and then out the park on Salmon, and we kind of skipped going through some of those neighborhoods because we were a little tired at that point, I think.
And I needed to go grocery shopping, so
yes.
we went down Hawthorne to Fred Meyer.
Yeah, that was a lot of walking. So do we want to say anything about Mount Tabor? Or?
We did learn that Mount Tabor is named for a mountain in Galilee, Israel, named for the settlers who just decided what to name it, as settlers do. And that's what we can continue to call it.
Yeah. Anything else stand out on this walk to you?
I learned that the park is closed on Wednesdays to motor vehicles,
yes.
which I've lived here for 10 years and never knew, even though there's signs that say so.
Yeah.
I've never brought a vehicle up there, so I didn't pay attention to those. But that's nice to know if you had a Wednesday afternoon and wanted to walk or ride your bike. But I've also never had a problem with cars up there.
I haven't either.
I guess I wonder why they do that, if it's just for pleasantries or if it's for some other reason. I didn't think about that till just now.
I did learn that. Oh shoot. So I was in my researches of Mount Tabor, they said it's closed on Wednesdays, I think maybe just for maintenance, just so they can get all the park equipment in there and like mow the grass or something. I don't know. I saw that mentioned.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense.
So that makes sense. What else?
I found it interesting, and I think I said to you that she mentioned that it was sort of just like its little lone village up there when the farmers who own the land, or the landowners that owned the land, sort of built a small town up there with the post office and the fire department, and a church, of course. They were Methodist, so a Methodist church,
which we did see at the beginning of the walk.
Yes. And so I thought that was interesting that, I think Portland and a lot of other cities, that's what happens. There's a lot of little villages that grow and come together. But I thought it must have been very peaceful up there at that time.
Yeah, except for the wolves and the cougars.
The wolves howling at night.
Yes. And the fire department or the fire station is still there. That was towards the beginning of our walk. There's a restaurant as you walk north on Stark from 60th called Caldera, and then a couple storefronts down from that is a coffee shop, and it was the fire station, and you can see it has kind of 2 big garages on the front, and then it still has the grooved sidewalk in front of it that was supposed to help the horses' hooves not slip.
Yeah,
So,
I kept thinking about that too. Like, get themselves running.
Yeah.
Against the fire. I wonder how many fires they would have.
Oh, yeah. It's a pretty
I
wooded
think
area.
yeah.
And no electricity. So.
Yeah. Of course, yeah, candle fires and whatnot were a big deal then. So maybe they had a lot of work.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking about was they talked about the settler Prettyman who owned the land up there that cut a path through the woods down to the river. It was like 3 miles long.
It was 3 miles long.
And now Hawthorne Boulevard.
Yes.
Pretty much. But I was thinking, that would be a nice walk through the woods down, and just what it must have, how different it was.
Yeah.
Oh, the forest fire too. I wrote down that
I don't remember that.
in 1846 there was a forest fire that made it much easier for the settlers to clear land.
Right.
Which he indicated may have made them feel it was divinely delivered.
Right.
As European settlers are wont to do.
Yes.
So, but, I just thought about that too, what forest fires still mean to us today, which is mostly entirely negative. But for them, because it was forested, it hadn't been cleared in terms of timber as much at that point. So anybody who did want to farm it would have to cut down a lot of trees and to pull them out of the land.
So that seems like it would make, the idea that Prettyman cleared a 3-mile path, maybe it was a little easier.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just like brush or short.
I would imagine.
Yeah. Because I think like cutting down 3 miles of spruce and conifers, I just can't imagine that with without gas powered machinery.
Yeah.
So Lori, what was the particular thing that stood out to you on this walk?
Well, one of the first things we saw was that was pointed out to us in the book was what had been an old school. It was called the A.L. Mills Open Air School. And particularly, I guess it was built for kids with health problems, particularly tuberculosis.
And that was the one that was on the southwest corner of the intersection.
Just off of Stark there. So we didn't look too closely at it, but it was just sort of a not very descript building.
Yeah, it's like a brick YMCA.
Yeah, nothing that interesting. It's still doing something. It's a YMCA community center sort of place. So it still exists and is open. But it was originally used for that, for kids who were suffering from tuberculosis and maybe other lung ailments. And they would live there. It was built in 1917 and it lasted till 1925. I found a picture of some of the kids. So they were in a classroom and the desks were sort of pushed off to the side and the kids were sort of in like army cots.
Oh, and it was in that building?
In that building. And as she also pointed out in the book, they would leave all the windows open winter, summer, spring, and fall, day and night.
Yeah.
So all the windows were open. And the kids were bundled up. They had blankets and whatnot, but they were sleeping in there. And that's the only picture I could find of that particular place. But when I did a little further research, I found that these places existed all over America and all over Europe.
Really?
And they were actually started in Germany, sort of maybe more like 1908. Wait, no, a little earlier than that, 1904. And by a doctor named Bernhard Bendix. Mm-hmm. And they were called in the woods or fresh air schools. And sometimes they would actually be just outside in the woods.
What?
And they would have maybe sort of tents and things that they would sleep in, but they would have their school outside.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So the whole idea was fresh air is good for you. Being outside in nature is good for you, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But then also after the Industrial Revolution, cities were pretty gross and sooty and full of toxins. So children who might be suffering from lung ailments, they thought, oh, they'd go out and, you know, be in the countryside and be outdoors more to clear their lungs and to get better. So, and I, you know, when I was in Germany recently, it's a very outdoors sort of culture. They do a lot of walking and hiking and being out in the mountains. So it's sort of, for me, it felt like, oh, that makes perfect sense that they might have things like that. So those lasted for a while. It started in Germany, spread throughout Europe. They did it sort of in different ways. And then the first one in America was in Providence, Rhode Island, and opened in 1908. And so the school we're talking about opened in 1917. So it had been going on for a while. It wasn't sort of a new idea by that time. So they're, yes, usually in rural locations.
Which Portland kind of was.
Right,
at that
in
time.
that little area. It would have been sort of out on the mountain, nearly on the mountain.
Right.
With a nice view of the river, perhaps. I don't know what they could see from up there. But beyond that picture, I didn't find too much written about that particular school. Although I imagine if I did some really deep research, I could go to the, you know, county archives or city, you know, historical information, the historical society maybe, and maybe even in that building if I went to visit it. So if I was going to really get into it, I would do some very deep research and find out more. But I did find an article. It was from a book called The Scrapbook, Volume 5, from January through June 1908. And it was called, Does Cold Weather Sharpen a Schoolboy's Wits? So it looked like the whole book was sort of, you know, those sort of, I think, early how to be a moral, upstanding person kind of books. So it had a lot of chapters in it about different things, and this was about these schools. There were some photos in there also. The children did not look like they were prospering.
Oh no.
They were rather dour looking, but of course pictures in the early days, they didn't smile as much,
Right.
but the children did not look happy.
Oh no.
In one, they were sort of gathered around a stove, and they were inside with all the windows open. And they were gathered around a stove drinking something hot. It was, you know, the caption said, they're having a hot drink by the stove.
My mom's voice just popped into my head, like, shut the windows, you're letting all the heat out.
And then there was another photo of a young boy, maybe 10 or 12, at a desk. And it sort of looked like he had his sleeping bag around him, like he was in a sleeping bag. And I think he had a hat on. And he also did not look like he was enjoying it at all.
Well, I guess also if they had tuberculosis, they probably just also were not going to look.
That also could be the case, that they were not doing so well. It also said that they had hot rocks, so they would have warm rocks on the stove and then be able to take them and put them in their hands or their, you know, coats or whatever.
You have to pay a lot for that these days.
Yeah.
Like hot rock massage.
Yeah, really. That's the trendy thing now.
Yeah.
Little did they know. So it wasn't that they expected them to be freezing cold. They seemed to acknowledge that it might be unpleasantly cold, but it was worth it to get that brisk, fresh air in your lungs.
Wow.
What it didn't say is whether or not it had any effect. I couldn't find anything.
So you can find out if these were...
Right, if they worked.
Okay. So I thought you had mentioned on the walk you remembered something.
Well, I did know a woman when I was younger. I knew an elderly woman. She was probably in her 70s or 80s at that point, and she had tuberculosis and had gone into a sanitarium in Arizona as a younger woman in the 50s. And it apparently worked for her. I mean, she was there for a year. She said mostly they would just rest. They would have the warm, dry air there. I don't remember telling me about medicines or anything, but I imagine that might have been a part of it.
Yeah.
But she did. I mean, she lived to be an old woman by the time I met her, and she didn't have tuberculosis anymore. So apparently it had some effect on her at least. But I don't know here in wet, rainy Portland in the middle of winter,
leaving the
how
windows
good
open.
that would be for you.
Right.
So I couldn't find any information about the effects. And this article was also looking at how it affected their whole being, you know, if it helped them do their schoolwork and things like that. And it wasn't a very long article. It mostly was descriptive. And then at the end, it just said something like, I will see if you know, if clean air makes clean minds or something like that. So there was no conclusion really to what might actually be happening.
More just like an opinion piece.
There wasn't even any opinion until that end. It was just descriptive and for a couple of pages of what the kids, and it was all boys at this school, of what the kids did and the sort of highlights of their day. Going to school, being cold,
that sounds
drinking hot cocoa.
I mean, that sounds like it could be like pleasant if you didn't have tuberculosis, like cozying up to a fire with hot chocolate. And I mean, I wouldn't mind going to school like that. Cool. Well,
so that's what happens when I go on a walk. I think about tuberculosis hospital or schools for kids.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. It was fun to do. What did you learn that interested you?
So I have taken this walk a few times, and the one thing that always sticks in my head is Lauren Foster writes in her book, one of Dr. Prettyman's claims to fame is that he brought the dandelion to Portland. Not because he planned to sell herbicides to generations of lawn owners, but for its medicinal properties. And that's, you mentioned Prettyman, and he had a very large plot of land on the west side of Mount Tabor. I think it went from 60th over to Cesar Chavez and down, I can't remember what the bottom delineation was, might even have been Division, and then of course on the east side bordered by Mount Tabor. And I thought, I wonder where dandelions originally came from. And spoiler alert, I'm not sure I definitively figured it out. They are very ubiquitous and exist pretty much all over the world in the northern hemisphere. The various sources that I looked at said they don't really exist in the southern hemisphere, which
I didn't know that.
I found that kind of interesting, and I'm not sure that I believe that. I mean, they're dandelions.
I have a friend in Australia I could ask her.
Oh, hey. Maybe that could be a follow-up. And also, so I wanted to try to find out the answer to this question without just Googling it. And the library has a lot of research databases, and I decided to try there first. Databases are curated, which means they have to pass requirements for accuracy, or else librarians won't buy their product. And, obviously businesses want to sell their products. Search engines are not curated, and they also have algorithms that kind of feed you answers they think that you want based on other things that you've looked at. So I started with the Gale Virtual Reference Library.
One of my favorites.
Yes. So much information there. And the first article I pulled up, it was kind of delightful. Whoever wrote it, it was a very, very informative and descriptive article, but I don't know, something about it. It was just very, a very pleasant read. And so I will read some of it. And the name of the family the dandelion belongs to is Asteraceae. And I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I looked at the pronunciation online. I didn't listen to a pronunciation. And it's the sunflower family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's the largest family of flowering plants, encompassing some 1,500 genera and nearly 25,000 species. Most species are herbs, but some are shrubs and a few are trees. They are of worldwide distribution and are often conspicuous in their habitats, which I would say dandelions definitely fit into that category. Some other plants in that family are ironweeds and ragweeds.
The ragweed makes sense. Sure.
Oh.
Things blowing.
Yeah.
Things that blow around.
Spreading all over. Despite the size of the family and its wide distribution, only a few members have become economically important crops, such as lettuce. I had no idea lettuce was part of the sunflower family.
I didn't either.
Artichokes, sunflowers, of course, since it's a sunflower family, chicory, and pyrethrum, which is an insecticide.
Oh.
Some species are notable weeds, e.g., dandelions, poor things, and some, like sagebrush, dominate the landscape where they occur. Many species are cultivated as garden ornamentals, and some use their generic names as common names. For example, aster, chrysanthemum, dahlia, Gaillardia, I'm not sure what that one is, and zinnia.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
I can see the similar look in all of those.
Kind of a similar structure. And this article did talk about the structure of the flower, but I was not really that interested in that. But yeah, a lot of those flowers look the same.
Yeah.
And so that one, that article didn't say anything about where they actually came from. So I looked on World Book Online, which is another database that we have, and it said, dandelions, quote, the early colonists brought the dandelion to America from Europe, unquote. Which was the only thing that it said about the origin of that. So I went back to Gale again and looked at more of those results. And they have something called the Gale Encyclopedia of Alternative Medicine, which I did not know about. And that said that dandelions are native to Greece.
Oh.
And I said, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I would not have guessed that, because usually plants are, brought over from Asia and Europe.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to verify that. And so I looked on Wikipedia, and they said, like I thought, Eurasia. And so who's right? And so that's, at that point, that's when I asked you. I was like, what do I do? And we also have an agricultural database, and you said you might try that. And so I looked at Agricola, and they weren't that helpful. They had titles like, dandelion is more tolerant to cadmium than to nickel excess.
That's what I was thinking after we talked about it. So academic. There would be sort of very specific theorems and papers and
right, and how to make herbicide that would kill dandelions, and how to manage them maybe for agricultural crops and not have them show up in your crops. So then I just did a keyword search in the catalog, in the library's catalog for dandelion, and I found what sounds like a delightful book, The Teeth of the Lion, The Story of the Beloved and Despised Dandelion by Anita Sanchez.
That does sound intriguing.
Yeah. So I might check that out. I might not. I just wanted an answer to this one question. So at that point, I switched to searching the internet and read the Wikipedia article a little further, and that may be the answer.
Okay.
It says fossils of seeds from the Pliocene era have been discovered in southern Russia.
Wow.
Yeah. And that citation is from Acta Paleobotanica, which is an international journal that publishes high quality content. And so I figured they are probably going to be like peer reviewed.
Right.
And the people that write it are actually academics. So I'm gonna consider that the answer, but
it's the most interesting answer for sure. But yeah, I think you trust. You got a trusted source and looked at all your different sources, and sometimes you do just have to think, okay, what's the most likely answer?
And I was also thinking after I found that information that wasn't maybe really my question. Maybe my question was, when did humans first discover that the dandelion was medicinally useful? You can eat it, and it's also a weed that you might not want in with your other crops. And so that I think would be a lot harder to pin down, because I found also in the Wikipedia article that many ancient cultures use them: Persian, Greek, Roman, Egyptian. So they really could have, quote, come from anywhere. So that's southern Russia, but who knows who finally figured out that we could use them. Thanks for listening. On our next walk, we'll be rambling around Mount Scott.